Chapter 29. Putting Out the Trash. After almost another full year of playing clubs without much else going on, I had a long talk with Paulie and Dave about Bob and Lynn. I told them my plan to not have Bob and Lynn represent me in anything anymore. I tried to explain to them that they hadn't done anything for us as actors. Instead of trying to get us more work or even appearances as actors, Bob was too busy on set yelling about Dido not being number one. I also had just begun writing my own scripts for a cartoon called Victor, which I was developing with my old playground bandmate, Tommy Snyder. I would not have Bob and Lynn sticking their nose in it. Along with our lawyer, Barry Perman, I finally convinced both of them to at least make some changes to our existing contract that was about to expire at the end of November 2010. Our contract stated that Bob and Lynn got 20% of everything we did in all forms of entertainment. Because of this ambiguous wording, they were probably entitled to take 20% of Dave's and my TSO salary, even though up until that point, they never did. I also explained to Paulie and Dave that even though their Z Brothers CD was made before signing with Bob and Lynn, anything that was in the kids' world was also up for grabs, simply because of the way the contract was worded. The contract just had a blanket statement saying they were entitled to 20% of everything we did. Ludicrous. All I wanted was it to be more specific, and this finally opened everyone's eyes. Or at least they began to squint a little. Paul and Dave agreed to have these points more clearly ironed out in a new contract. The only problem was that there was a stipulation in our existing contract that stated we would automatically renew unless we delivered something in writing by a certain date. Before we were able to figure out the exact changes we wanted to put in the new contract, we first had to send a certified letter stating that we were no longer renewing our old contract. Bob and Lynn received the letter, I think somewhere on Thanksgiving morning. I absolutely agree. It was terrible timing, and that it looked like we weren't renewing because Z-Rock was canceled. But that wasn't the case at all. I had actually decided that I didn't want to renew over a year ago now, during the filming of Season 2. Paulie and Dave still wanted to keep them as our managers, but they wanted to add a few stipulations to the contract. That was the reason we sent them the certified letter. Bob and Lynn called a meeting shortly after receiving the letter, and Bob led off by saying, "We are not changing even one word in that contract." I'm not sure where he got the balls to think it was okay to start off a business meeting that way, but he did, and I couldn't have been happier. Maybe Paulie and Dave would finally realize who we were dealing with. Two people who thought they held all the power and that we were nothing without them. They could screw us over and do whatever they wanted, and we didn't have the right to even question them. Bob's and Lynn's true colors came out in that meeting. The pair knew I spearheaded the whole thing. After the meeting, I found out that when I got up to use the bathroom, Lynn secretly said to Paulie and Dave, "Okay, guys, let's find a new drummer." I couldn't believe it. Stuck up, conceited asses. After the meeting, Paulie started to show signs of coming around to my way of thinking. He never in a million years expected them to say they weren't changing a single word and then suggest to get rid of me. Paulie was almost there, but he needed one more push, and he received it from the most unlikely source. That January, Paulie went to LA for NAMM. I didn't make it because I wanted to stay home with Matt and Angelina. One night, while visiting the Rainbow Bar and Grill, Paulie ran into Z-Rock guest star Frank Stallone. As Paulie tells the story, Paulie and Frank sat and talked over dinner for about 2 hours. Paulie is someone that wears his heart on his sleeve and decided to open up to Frank about our current situation with Bob and Lynn. It was risky because Frank had been Bob's friend for years. But Paulie explained the whole situation and how Bob said they weren't changing even one word in the contract. In response, Frank told Paulie that something similar had happened to him many years ago. Frank's manager had also been his longtime friend, but there came a point where he had to let him go. He told Paulie, "If you feel someone is not doing right by you, or is holding you down, you have to cut ties immediately. You don't want to wake up 10 years from now and say, shit, I wish I would have made a move back then. Maybe things would be different. Even though I'd been trying to get through to that thick afro of his for years, it took only 2 hours with Frank Stallone to break through. When Paulie returned from LA, he was officially done with Bob and Lynn. I wanted to just tell Bob and Lynn, okay, if you don't want to change even one word in the contract, then you're fired. That's how I wanted to handle it, and how we should have done it. Instead, Paulie decided he didn't want to look like the bad guy, so he came up with this elaborate scheme to draft a contract that he knew Bob and Lynn would reject, just so we could say, we wanted to keep them as our managers, but they said no to our new contract. I thought it was a ridiculous plan. But of course, Dave went along with it, and because it was Paulie's idea, I was once again outvoted. Overall, it didn't really matter. There was no way to end our relationship with Bob and Lynn on good terms. Bob had been almost a father figure to Paulie and Dave, and there was no way it was going to end nicely. Paulie had our lawyer make every change we wanted in the contract, plus a few added things to really tilt things to our side. Once drafted, it was mailed to Bob and Lynn, who immediately saw right through Paulie's attempt at deception. The plan completely backfired. Instead of us having the high ground because they said we are not changing a single word, they now had the proverbial high ground because they could show everyone our ridiculous contract offer that they promptly rejected. At the end of the day, it didn't really matter to me. Once and for all, we were finally done with Bob and Lynn. Or so we thought. After getting rid of Bob and Lynn, it was time for ZO2 to clean up their financial situation. The cost of our third album, Casino Logic, was a heavy debt. Paulie and Dave began discussing ways and what percent of gigs and merch would be put against that debt. I cut them off immediately. With guys, I told you, I was 100% against funding that record on your credit cards, and I would hold no financial obligation for any of it. After a long heated discussion, I finally convinced both of them to go bankrupt and wipe the debt clean so that we could have a chance at a fresh start. Otherwise, there was no way to keep ZO2 afloat. While Paulie and Dave were taking care of all of the bankruptcy paperwork, I decided to look more deeply into what exactly happened at our old record label, Riker Hill. I contacted the former head of the label, Michael Morrison, from whom I'd been completely isolated for over a year per Bob and Lynn's request. Well, demand. Michael and I always got along great. He was a big Rangers and Giants fan like me, and we often watched games together, which made the whole situation even more awkward when Bob and Lynn started excluding them from everything. Once back in touch with Michael, I just asked him straight up, what the hell happened? Michael began to break down the whole situation for me. He explained Bob and Lynn had no idea what they were doing running the label, and that everything they originally told Michael Woke and I about how they knew how to run a label was basically a lie. He went on to say, obviously, a startup independent label wasn't expected to make money at first, but Bob and Lynn were draining the label dry. Both had enormous salaries, and 95% of the time, Bob did nothing but go on the road with ZO2 or sit on the set of Z-Rock. He did absolutely nothing for the label. That was when everything started to blow up. The label told Bob that they would have to stop paying him his salary if he didn't come to the office more. Michael believes that this is what triggered all the bad blood, which then snowballed into the end of our relationship. Michael said they even hid everything related to Z-Rock from us. I wanted to try to work with IFC to cross-promote or somehow capitalize on Z-Rock, but Bob and Lynn told me that I wasn't even allowed on set because the network didn't want anyone from the label around. Of course, it was all lies. So, again, for anyone reading this that still thinks it was all ZO2's fault about what happened with Bob and Lynn, think again. This book offers first-hand accounts from one of the heads of IFC stating that our managers, Bob and Lynn, would be banned from the set of Z-Rock because they were a hindrance. And I note the head of our record label saying Bob and Lynn had no idea what they were doing at the label. Bob and Lynn over the years have tried to spin it many other ways, but this is the truth, and it's coming from real sources. I then asked Michael what happened with the funding for ZO2's third album, Casino Logic. He replied with something that absolutely shocked and infuriated me. He said, Riker wanted to absolutely fulfill the terms of the third album. We were ready to pay the exact amount that was in the contract. Bob and Lynn came back to us and said they would need almost double the agreed upon amount because of promo and touring. Not only couldn't we pay that, we didn't have to. Riker Hill wanted to follow the contract, and Bob and Lynn didn't. I told Michael, ZO2 was told that Riker Hill refused to pay for that record, period. Never once did Bob and Lynn inform us that Riker was offering the contracted sum for Casino Logic. Michael was beyond furious. Everything was starting to come together. After hearing everything from the people at IFC, from our producers Mark, and now the head of our label, combined with all of the underhanded things that I'd experienced firsthand, namely lying about my wedding to the network and our producers, I was now more certain than ever that we ultimately made the right choice by cutting ties with our managers. Years later, I still feel it was one of the best decisions I ever made. ZO2 would stay together for another 2+ years, and we did some really great things in that time. Things that most bands could only dream of. We played giant festivals like M3 with bands like Cinderella, and we opened for Stone Temple Pilots at the Tampa Bay Lightning hockey team season kickoff party. We did other great shows as well, like opening for Stryper, Dream Theater, and even UFO. Also during this time, we made what I consider to be our best 2 videos, for No Way Out and one of our newest singles, That's What's Up.
Welcome to the family, son.
We also decided to start releasing singles instead of waiting for another full-length album. I knew my days of traveling in a van with ZO2 were numbered. I wasn't 25 years old anymore without a care in the world. I now had my baby to support, and it was getting more and more difficult to leave her. I knew something had to change. I just didn't want to be a full-time touring musician anymore.